Welcome to
Welcome to the world of color. Not the Disney version though, that would get me sued. Please don't sue me. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down how color works in dreams, how we can use it in a variety of situations with some really cool examples. If you're interested in seeing that, stick around. So to begin with, I think we need to discuss what color is in dreams and how it works. We can access color in dreams through a variety of gadgets as well as sculptures and paint. All of them have this type of tint color here, and some of them have something called a hue cycle. This color wheel here, the tint color, specifically with the sculpts, has two parts. This outside wheel here is the hue, and the inside wheel is the shade. Now when it comes to sculptures, tint is something that is applied on top of the sculpt, so we can see if it's at 0%, this is the original sculpt color, and if we go to 200%, then this is the pure color that's on there, and when this is at 100, we can see that it kind of blends between the two. So if we go to something like this green, it doesn't really look green, and that's because it's blending between the green and this original color. There's also the hue, which goes from 0 degrees to 360 degrees, and that is 360 degrees because it's just picking from this color here. So if we had a hue, we could pick from any one of these colors here, and it should be noted that these are all colors, but there are no black or white in here. To get black or white, we'd have to use the shade. So up here would be white, and down here would be black. So this begs the question of how this color works. To show that, I'll get out a microchip, and in here we'll put a node, and we can output this color into this node. So if we take a splitter, we can split the values here, and we get three values, R, G, and B, red, green, and blue. These RGB values are all a percentage, so they all go from 0 to 1. So if we plug these in, we can take a look at how these values work. So when the color is white, R, G, and B are all at 100%. Conversely, when they're all 0, then the color is black. And this is how all the colors break down. So if we had red, it's just 1 in R, or 100% red, 0% green and blue. And if we went to blue, then it would be just 100% blue with 0 red and green. Green would be 100% green with 0 red and blue. And any other color here is a combination of these three values. Now there's also the shade here, and we can see that if we drag this along the bottom part of the triangle, the blue value decreases, and we can see that the blue actually gets more and more muted until eventually it's black. Let's pick a red, make that a little clearer. So here red's at 100%, and the green and blue values don't change, but the red value is getting lowered the closer we get to black. We can see that in these values as well as the color on the block here. Now when it comes to sculptures, this tint here, like we said, blends with this. So if we go back into sculpt mode, we can see that in here we can actually set colors as well. So for example, we can make this block red if we wanted to. And inside of here, no tint is actually set. Neither is the hue. What's interesting about this is, remember, we can blend with the tint amount. So if we added blue into here and we blended it between the red and the blue, then we will get some sort of purple, as we can see here. Another way to access colors inside of sculpt mode, if we touch the touchpad, then we can bring up this color wheel, which we can just pick colors like this using the hue and the shade. And one really neat thing about this is we can actually have multiple colors. So if we had a yellow and a blue, this will, if I don't touch this and I leave it the way it is, every time we stamp something down, we'll get some shade, some color from within this here, right? And if I go into smear mode, it keeps the color that's selected, and the next one will have a slightly different shade. However, we can also tumble this mixed color here. So if I hold R2, I can kind of move that around. And let me actually add one more color just to make this clearer. So I'll go ahead and tumble between these values, and we can see that this changes constantly. So every time we put it down, it'll be some value or some color within that range. But if we go into smear, we can see that it will continue to change colors as we smear. And so again, this has no tint, and we can apply tint onto it to kind of change the way this looks if we're blending between the actual sculpt colors and our tint color as well. We can also use hue on this, which is another pretty neat effect. So that's how the colors work within the sculptures. It's very similar in paint as well. But now let's get back to setting the color using the tint. So I'm going to plug 3 value sliders into this combiner, which is set to the color mode. And we can plug this into the tint, and we can see that we can adjust the color however we'd like using this RGB. Or we could have a value slider that ranges from 0 to 360 and plug that into the hue, which I'll set to 1, and then set this value to multiply against 1 by using the modulate mode. So to change the hue, we can just slide through this slider and find a hue that we like as well. Now remember, this is separate from the tint, so if this is at 100%, then it overwrites it. However, if this is at 100%, then the hue blends with the tint that we've selected. One super simple thing to do is to generate random colors using either an RGB value or a hue. So let's say we have some object and we want to assign a random color to it. One of the more popular ways is to take a signal generator, which generates a value between 0 and 1 at a constant rate, and triple that. So we have 3 of these, and put these into a number combiner, which will set to the color type. So we can take all of these and plug it into that combiner and plug the combiner into this tint here. Now I'll go ahead and set the tint all the way up, and it's creating random colors. But this doesn't look very good. So how can we make this work better? One thing we could do is we could take a signal manipulator and put that between, and the output will freeze the output, and that will go into the color. So when time starts, it'll pick a random color, and then it won't change anymore. Now the only exception to this is it will never be black, because a black value would be 0, 0, 0, which would output nothing, and so the freeze wouldn't work. So it'll get close, but it will never actually be pure black with this technique. Instead of using this freeze, we could use something like a timer on 1 frame or a timeline for 1 frame. And when that's done, then we can freeze. So we could do something like that. And so now this way we could get a black value, right? And if we didn't want to do that, we can do the same thing, except a value from 0 to 360. And we plug that into here, and that would go straight into the hue. Again, we set the hue to a 1, and then set this to a modulate. And now since we're getting a random hue, this will never be black or white, because the hue colors are this outside wheel here, right? There's no black there, there's no white. So it'll give us a color from the hue wheel. Now say we had this setup, or the other setup, doesn't really matter, but once it's picked a color, it doesn't really need to keep doing all of this stuff, right? That's kind of expensive for no reason. So one cool trick that I saw Tapchilds do, we could take the value and plug it into this node and wire the node to itself. Then the output of this node will be what sets the color in here. And so we can delete that one. So now it'll pick a value just like before. However, this time, when this timer is done, we'll actually destroy this chip. And so now with this technique, when time starts, it'll pick a random color and it'll delete the chip. And this thing just holds on to the color with the looped node. So if you had a bunch of stuff that you wanted to kind of have randomly colored, you could just attach this microchip onto it or group it, and this microchip will delete itself. But this way, if you had like hundreds of trees and you wanted them to all have, you know, kind of different varying shades of colors, you could do that and have it create a varied look among all the treetops for basically zero cost. I mean, there'd be the initial cost of this, but it would delete itself. And so if you, even if you had, you know, thousands of these things, it wouldn't really make a difference. Now you would want to group it, so we'd have it like this. So let's say we had a ton of these. We can see we're at 2% gameplay memory, but when we start time, we lose 1% gameplay memory, or gain, because all those chips deleted themselves. So now I think is a good time to go over how I did the color gradients. I posted something on Reddit the other day showing this, and on Twitter, and people seem to really get a kick out of it, so I figured I would show you how I did it. Now, it's a little technical, but I will try to keep this as simple as possible in order not to lose anybody. So, the basic idea was I had two endpoints, and each of them had their own hue. Every block that was between each of these endpoints, its hue would be some percentage between this hue and this hue based on where it is between the two objects. Maybe that sounds a little confusing. Hopefully not, and hopefully after I explain this, it'll make sense. So I'll get this tag out, and I'll just place it in the block, and I'll call this A. Now, just for demo purposes, this is not the most thermo-efficient way to do this, but just for demo purposes, this is going to be the easiest way to explain. I will take the position of this and place it into a transmitter, which I'll call A. And now I'll get a receiver out, and this will be scene wide, and this will listen for the A hue. So that will go out and into the object, straight into the hue cycle. Now again, I'm going to set this to 1 and have it multiply against 1 on the modulate setting. So I'll go ahead and copy this over, and this will be our B block. So I'll go ahead and change this to be B. You can change the tag too. And then this will be B hue, and the same thing, right? So if we have a microchip, we can go ahead and place a value slider here that will go from 0 to 360, and that will go into a transmitter which we'll call A hue, and then we'll just copy both of these things, and this will be B hue, right? And so we can see that as we change these hues, these two blocks have two different colors. Okay, so now we can talk about how we do the gradient. So the further apart they are, the better this gradient will look. So what I'm going to do is I'll just copy this object over, and I'll get rid of everything except for the node and the tag. And so just to not be confused, I'm going to get rid of the name there. And so this thing will have, again, this is just for demo purposes, this thing will have, we'll just get 4 wireless receivers. Nope. And we'll make them all scene wide. And so this thing will listen for A, this thing will listen for B, And actually I might do this the other way around. This one will listen for B, and this one will listen for A. This one will listen for B hue, and this one will listen for A hue. And we'll split this position. So we take this block's position and calculate a percentage along this path from this block to this block. We then apply that percentage on the difference between these two hues from this hue to this hue. So if I take the B position and subtract the A position, that gets us the distance. And if I take our position, this block's position, and subtract the A position, that gives us the distance from this block to A, or the distance from A to this block, compared to this, which is the distance from the A block to the B block. And we divide the distance from this block to A by the total distance from A block to B block. That gives us a percentage of how far along this path that block is. Also, movie magic ruined. You can see this is actually just a text displayer. It's okay. I do it for you guys. Alright, so then here I will do the same thing. I'll take the B hue and subtract the A hue, like so. What we want to do is we'll take this and we want to multiply it by this percentage. Now for this percentage to work correctly, because this is a fat wire, I'm just going to plug it into this combiner to turn it into a thin wire. Otherwise it won't work, because these fat wires carry multiple values and this addition won't work the way we want it to, or the multiplication, excuse me. So we have our percentage multiplied by the difference between these two hues, and we add that result to the A hue, and that is the hue for this block. So because this is very close to this block, it has a hue very close to this hue compared to that one. The further along the path this block moves, the closer the hue gets to this block. Right? So if we fill in the gaps by cloning this thing, we can see that we get a gradient on these blocks. So if I group these all together real quick, go scope in, and I'll put some glow on these because I think it looks really neat that way. We can see how this gradient looks, right? So we can play around with different values. We can see at the extremes the gradient is very obvious, but when these gradients are really close together, they look pretty smooth. And obviously the more blocks you have between your A block and your B block, the better and smoother this gradient will look. So if I move this block further, let me go ahead and get some more clones here. Right, now we can see, since these are further apart, the gradient looks a lot smoother. And so that's exactly how this works. So I don't think using a single block is a good move, especially for this type of setup, because it's not very scalable. But you could create very long blocks, meaning they would be super tall, and you would have the same effect over a much bigger area, right? But if you do take the time to set up something like this, there are some cool effects that we can do. So we can see that they continue to work even if you move them around. And one really neat thing is, let's go ahead and turn off grid snap. Because it's using the positions, when we rotate these things, we get a pretty neat, kind of a weird effect, but also creates some really cool combinations here. It looks so 80s, you know, and I think that's really, really fun. Let me go ahead and copy a couple of these. Yeah, I mean, that looks so sick. And of course, it's completely up to you how far you want those gradients to go. So there's how I did the color gradients for these. There's a programmatic way about going about it anyways. Now there are other ways to do color gradients in a more native dream sense. If we have a block, something like this, we can spray paint onto here. So let me go ahead and get the spray paint out, and I'll just use a sphere. So if I had something like this red, I'll go ahead and make the sphere bigger. We can see it's like a very sharp edge, but if you hold L1 and press square, this menu pops up and you can add soft blend. And if you ramp it all the way up, it already kind of creates its own little gradient effect, which I think looks really cool. And obviously this would work pretty well to do, gradient effects on a sculpt. However, obviously this is limited because it's bound to the sculpt. And so if you wanted it to have different colors, you'd have to, well, you could change the colors by maybe blending with this, which I think is pretty cool. But if you wanted, a wider range or something, then, you're kind of out of luck. And if you wanted this to happen on multiple sculpts, then you'd have to make copies or create new ones. And while we're on the topic, I should probably cover lights here, because lights can also add color, right? You can add colors into the lights themselves, which can also kind of add its own flair. So we can see that as we change these, the color of the lights kind of creates its own gradient, and we can play with the beam angle and the fade angle. And also there's hue too, which is cool. And then also there's the image blur, which I think if you add enough blur onto these images, sometimes you can create some really cool detailed effects that seem like they probably took forever, but really they didn't. Right, so here's another way to add color as well. Now, a great way to do color transitions is to use a timeline. So say we have this puppet here, and so I'll get a keyframe out, and what I'll do is I'll change the color of this to something like red, right? And now I'll get another one out, and so now this one will maybe be yellow, or maybe more like something like that. And then I'll get another one, and this one will be green. Okay, so we have these color transitions. We can see that it goes from red to yellow to green. So let's say we wanted this Let's say we wanted this puppet's health, or his color, to reflect what his health is. So we have a health manager in here. So if I take the current health, which is this, and divide it by the max health, that gives us a percentage. And we can plug that percentage into the playhead of this timeline. So when it's at 100 health, he's green, and his color will continually go towards red the less health he has. So if I get a health modifier out, I'll set it to zone and continuous. Maybe we'll do like 10. And so you'll see that he loses health over time. And because of that, his color will slowly change, and it'll eventually turn red just before he dies. Now, one more example of a color transition would be, here I have this object here, which is just a ball, and what I'm doing is I'm emitting this ball from a location called S, and the ball has its own tag, which is in the center. Well, it's supposed to be in the center, but it's not. That's okay though. So I'm taking the distance between those two and plugging that into this hue cycle. So the further away it gets from the S tag, the further along the hue cycle is. Also, Movie Magic ruined yet again. This is a giant sculpt here. Let's just forget you ever saw that. So here, the balls, we can see they change color the further away they get from their starting location. One last thing I want to show off is a little color palette picker type thing I made the other day. let's use the newer version, I suppose. This is a little thing, a little tool that'll allow you to play around with various values. So it's got RGB built in, so we can just play with various RGB values to see, what they produce, right? And so this is a decent way of playing around with colors to try and figure out, maybe little color combinations you like for your project. You can also switch it to hue mode so that you can play around with the hue as well. So that's pretty nice. So this is just a little tool to help anyone, so that if they wanted to try and figure out a specific color, they could do so. Otherwise, if you picked a color that you like in here, I would recommend just outputting that into a splitter so that you can see what the numbers are for yourself. I suppose, I could add something into here, like just grab these three things and a splitter. Nope, not a combiner, a splitter. So I'll just dump that into here. And so if we had a color coming in, we could split these and see what they look like. So it's like for viewing only, I suppose. So I can add that and leave that if you want. But yeah, this is a nice little thing to play around with. I'll make sure to leave a link for this In Dreams thing in the description. So that pretty much covers everything I had planned for colors in Dreams. I'd really love to hear any feedback from anybody who's new or old to the channel. I had a pretty decent uptick in subscriber count from the color gradient video I posted on the subreddit. So thank you to everybody who's new around here. And without feedback from you, the viewer, and without the viewer, I wouldn't have a channel. But without your feedback, I wouldn't really know what people like. So, please feel free to leave comments and let me know what you want to see, because I'm more than happy to make videos to help the community out. And I feel like the feedback also helps guide, the content that I'm making. So, really appreciate that. So if you enjoyed the video, I'd also appreciate it if you gave me a thumbs up. If you're new and you want to see more tutorials, go ahead and feel free to subscribe. I have a lot of tutorials on my channel already, so feel free to browse through those if this wasn't what you're looking for. And I post new videos like once a week, so feel free to subscribe and stick around and, join in. I hope everyone's doing super well, staying super safe, thriving as much as possible in this current scary time. I'll see you next time.